The train didn't stop for long in the small frontier town, but for Clara Whitmore, it felt like stepping into another world. Dust swirled in the warm air as she stepped down, clutching her worn leather bag tightly against her side. The town was quieter than she expected, just a few wooden buildings, a general store, and a scattering of people moving at an unhurried pace. Nothing like the crowded streets she had left behind. But Clara hadn't come here for comfort. She had come because she had no other choice. Back home, everything was slipping away. Her family's land, once full of promise, had been reduced to dry soil and unpaid debts. Letters from her mother had grown more urgent with each passing week. There was no more time. Clara had to find a way to send money back, no matter the cost. She straightened her shoulders, forcing herself to look confident, even though her heart was racing. "I just need a chance," she whispered under her breath. The general store was her first stop. The bell above the door chimed softly as she entered, and the scent of flour and fresh wood filled the air. A kind-faced older woman stood behind the counter, offering Clara a welcoming smile. "Passing through?" the woman asked gently. Clara hesitated. "No, I'm looking for work." The woman studied her for a moment, not unkindly, but with quiet understanding. "Not much call for workers these days," she said, but she paused as if considering something. "There is one opportunity." Clara leaned forward, slightly, hope flickering in her chest. "There's a rancher just outside town," the woman continued. "Name's Elias Boone. Keeps to himself mostly. Honest man, though. He's been asking around for help." "What kind of help?" Clara asked carefully. The woman lowered her voice just a little. "He's offering a marriage arrangement. A practical one. Says he needs someone to help manage the home, and in return, he'll provide a steady income." Clara blinked, certain she had misunderstood. "Marriage?" "It's not what it sounds like," the woman added quickly. "More. Like an agreement. He's made it clear respect, kindness, and no obligations beyond that." Clara's thoughts spun. Marriage? To a man she had never met? It sounded unthinkable, improper, even. And yet, a steady income. Her mother's letters came rushing. Back into her mind, the worry in every word. The quiet desperation between the lines. Clara swallowed hard. "Where can I find him?" she asked. The ranch sat a short distance outside town, surrounded by open land that stretched endlessly beneath the wide sky. It was simple but well kept, with a sturdy wooden house and a small barn nearby. Clara hesitated at the gate, her fingers tightening around the strap of her bag. This is madness, she thought. But she stepped forward anyway. Before she could knock, the door opened. Elias Boone stood there tall, composed, and quieter than she expected. His presence wasn't intimidating, just steady. His eyes met hers, calm and observant, as if he were trying to understand her without asking a single question. "Yes," he said. Clara took a breath. "I was told you're looking for someone." He studied her for a moment longer, then stepped aside. "You should come in." Inside, the house was simple but warm. Sunlight streamed through the windows, illuminating a space that felt more like a home than a place of business. They sat across from each other at a small wooden table. "I'll be direct," Elias said. "I'm offering a marriage of convenience. Nothing more, nothing less." Clara nodded slowly, her hands folded tightly in her lap. "I don't expect affection," he continued. "Only honesty and respect. You'll have your own space, your independence. And in return, I'll provide what you need." His voice was calm, measured, almost distant. Then he added, "There's just one condition." Clara looked up. "No questions about my past." The words hung in the air between them. Clara hesitated. It was an unusual request. But something in his tone wasn't threatening. It was guarded, careful, as if he had learned the hard way to keep certain things hidden. She thought of her own situation, of the truths she hadn't shared with anyone here. Maybe they weren't so different. "And what about you?" Elias asked. "Why are you here?" Clara met his gaze, choosing her words carefully. "I need to earn money for my family." It wasn't the whole story, but it was enough. Elias nodded as if that answer satisfied him. Silence settled between them, not uncomfortable, but thoughtful. Finally, Clara exhaled softly. "I accept," she said. The words surprised even her, but once spoken, they felt right. Elias didn't smile, but something in his expression softened. "Then we'll make it simple," he replied. "We start fresh, no expectations. Just honesty." Clara gave a small nod. As the sun dipped lower outside, casting golden light across the room, she realized something unexpected. For the first time in a long while, she felt a sense of possibility, not certainty. Not comfort, but hope. And sometimes that was enough. To begin, the morning after their agreement, Clara woke to a silence so complete it almost felt unfamiliar. For a moment, she forgot where she was. The soft light filtering through the window, the gentle creak of wood as the house settled, the distant sound of wind brushing across open land, it was nothing like the restless noise of the life she had left behind. Here, everything felt slower, calmer, careful. She sat up, smoothing her dress as the reality of the previous day returned. She was married. Not in the way she had once imagined, not with celebration or joy, not with love whispered beneath soft music, but with a quiet agreement between two strangers who needed something from each other. And yet, it didn't feel wrong. Clara stepped out of her room, unsure of what she was supposed to do. The arrangement had been clear in its simplicity, but the details of daily life remained uncertain. As she entered the main room, she stopped. Elias was already awake. He stood near the small kitchen table, setting down 2 plates of breakfast: fresh bread, eggs, and something warm that filled the air with a comforting scent. He moved with quiet efficiency, as though this routine had been practiced many times before. "You're up early," Clara said softly. Elias glanced at her, his expression calm. "It's a habit." She hesitated before stepping closer. "You didn't have to cook." "It's no trouble," he replied simply. "You'll have enough to adjust to." Something about that caught her attention. Adjust. He understood this wasn't easy for her. And yet, he didn't press or question. He simply made space for it. They sat across from each other, the table between them feeling less like a barrier and more like a quiet understanding. For a while, neither spoke. It wasn't awkward, just unfamiliar. Clara wasn't used to silence that didn't demand to be filled. "This place," she said finally, glancing around. "You've kept it well." Elias nodded once. "It's easier that way." Again, simple answers, careful answers. Clara noticed it immediately. He never said more than necessary. After breakfast, Elias stood and gathered the dishes. Clara instinctively rose to help, but he shook his head gently. "You don't need to do everything at once," he said. "Take your time." She paused. "I'm part of this now. I should contribute." Elias studied her for a moment, then gave a small nod. "All right. We'll figure it out together." Together. The word lingered in her mind longer than she expected. Over the next few days, Clara began to settle into a routine. She cleaned, organized, and slowly made the house feel more lived in. She opened windows, let fresh air in, and even placed small wildflowers in jars to brighten the space. Elias noticed. He didn't comment much, but she would catch him pausing slightly when he entered a room, as if taking in the changes, as if appreciating them. True to his word, he remained respectful of her space. He never entered her room without asking. He gave her time alone when she needed it. And though he spoke little, he always listened when she did. Still, there were things she couldn't ignore. Every afternoon, Elias rode into town. He never explained why. And every evening, he returned just before sunset, quiet, thoughtful, sometimes carrying letters he never opened in front of her. There was also a door in the house he kept closed. Not locked, just untouched. Clara noticed it on her second day. A simple wooden door near the back hallway. Nothing remarkable about it, except that Elias never went inside while she was nearby. She didn't ask. She remembered the condition. No questions about his past. But curiosity wasn't so easily controlled. One evening, as the sun painted the sky in soft shades of gold and amber, Clara sat on the porch steps, watching the horizon stretch endlessly before her. Elias joined her a moment later, keeping a respectful distance. "It's quieter here than I expected," she said. "That's why I chose it," he replied. She glanced at him. "To be alone?" Elias didn't answer right away. Then, quietly, "To have peace." Clara nodded slowly. She understood that more than she wanted to admit. For a while they sat in silence, the kind that no longer felt unfamiliar but shared. "You don't seem like someone who needed to start over," she said gently. Elias's gaze remained on the horizon. Appearances can be misleading. It wasn't an answer, but it wasn't a refusal either. It was the closest he had come to revealing something. Clara didn't push further. Instead, she found herself saying something she hadn't planned. "This wasn't what I expected," she admitted. Elias looked at her then. "Regret?" She shook her head after a moment. "No," and it surprised her how true that felt. This arrangement, this strange, quiet marriage wasn't built on love or promises, but it wasn't cold either. There was kindness here, respect, something steady. By the end of the first week, Clara realized something about life in a small frontier town. Nothing went unnoticed. It started subtly. A glance held a second too long. A conversation that quieted when she walked by. A smile that carried curiosity behind its warmth. And now so was she. Wagons rolled slowly past. Shop doors creaked open and shut, and neighbors greeted each other like family. Clara stayed close to Elias the first time, unsure of how she would be received. "This is normal," he told her quietly as they walked. "People will look. It passes." She nodded, though she wasn't entirely convinced. The same bell chimed as they entered, and the kind-faced woman behind the counter immediately looked up. Recognition lit her expression. "Well, she..." "Yes," she replied, glancing briefly at Elias. "I did." The woman nodded approvingly, her gaze shifting between them, not in judgment, but in quiet curiosity. "You'll find this town simple," she said as she gathered a few items Elias had requested. "But simple doesn't mean unkind." "I've noticed that," Clara said gently, and it was true. Everywhere they went, people greeted Elias with respect. He wasn't talkative, but he acknowledged each person with a nod or a few words. There was no fear in the way others treated him, only a kind of careful regard. That surprised her, for someone so private. He was clearly known. As they left the store, Clara caught snippets of conversation drifting behind them. "That's her, isn't it? Seems kind enough. Didn't expect him to settle like that." Clara pretended not to hear, but the words lingered. Later, at a small bakery stand, a young woman handed Clara a wrapped loaf with a bright "I am, thank you." The woman hesitated, then added, "Elias is different from most men around here, but he's a good one." Clara looked at her curiously. "You've known him long?" "A while," she said. "Long enough to know he keeps to himself for a reason." There it was again, not suspicion, not fear, just curiosity. Clara didn't ask more, but her thoughts grew heavier as the day went on. On the ride back to the ranch, she found herself watching Elias more closely. The way he guided the horse with steady hands. The way he seemed completely at ease in silence, as if it were something he trusted. Who are you really? The question echoed in her mind, but she didn't speak it aloud. She remembered his condition, no questions about his past. But the town had already begun asking for her. Over the next few days, Clara grew more comfortable going into town on her own. At first, she worried about being alone, but she quickly realized there was nothing to fear. The town was welcoming in its own quiet way. People spoke to her more easily now. They asked about the ranch, about how she was settling in, about whether she liked the land, and sometimes about Elias. He's always been respectful. One older man told her as he fixed a broken wheel nearby. Just not one for crowds. Did he always live here? Clara asked before she could stop herself. The man chuckled softly. It wasn't much of an answer. None of them were. Every conversation gave her a piece, but never the full picture. Back at the ranch, Clara began to notice changes in herself. She laughed more easily now. She found comfort in small routines, morning light through the window, the rhythm of daily tasks, the quiet companionship that didn't demand anything from her. And Elias, he noticed too. One evening, as she set flowers on the table, he paused near the doorway. "You've made this place feel different," he said. Clara turned slightly, surprised. Different how? He considered the question. Lived in. Something about that stayed with her, because she felt it too. This place, once just a shelter, was slowly becoming something else, something warmer. Still, the questions remained. That evening, as Clara stepped outside to gather fresh air, she noticed something she hadn't before. Just looking at it, as if it carried something heavier than words. Clara didn't approach. She stayed where she was, watching quietly. After a moment, Elias folded the letter carefully and placed it in his pocket. His expression returned to its usual calm, but not worry. Something closer to memory. Later that night, Clara lay awake, staring at the ceiling as the soft sounds of the ranch settled around her. The town's voices echoed in her mind. He wasn't always like this. He used to be someone important. He keeps to himself for a reason. Clara exhaled slowly. She had come here for one purpose, to earn money, to survive, to leave. But now, she found herself wanting to understand, not out of suspicion, but because, somewhere along the way, Elias Boone had stopped feeling like a stranger and started feeling like a story she wanted to know. The ranch had grown quieter in Clara's mind, not because it lacked sound, but because her thoughts had become louder. Every small detail now carried meaning. The way Elias paused before answering certain questions. The careful distance he kept from anything personal. The letters he carried but never opened in front of her. And most of all, the things he chose not to say. Clara tried to ignore it. She reminded herself of the agreement they had made. No questions about his past. It had seemed simple at the time. Fair even. But now that she had begun to feel at home here, now that Elias no longer felt like a stranger, that condition felt heavier than before. Because curiosity, she realized, wasn't just about knowing. It was about caring. One afternoon, while Elias was away in town, Clara decided to reorganize part of the barn. It wasn't something she had been asked to do, but she had come to enjoy keeping things in order, bringing a quiet sense of life to the spaces around her. Sunlight filtered through the wooden slats as she moved old tools and swept away dust. The air smelled of hay and dry earth, familiar and grounding. As she worked, she noticed something tucked behind a stack of crates. A small wooden box. It wasn't locked, just Hidden. Clara paused, her hand still. She knew she should leave it alone. This wasn't her past to uncover, and yet something about it pulled at her. Slowly, she stepped closer. It's just a box, she murmured to herself. But when she knelt and lifted the lid, she realized it was much more than that. Inside were neatly stacked papers, letters, folded with care. Beneath them, a few worn sketches. And at the very bottom, a name. Not Elias Boone, Elias Carter. Clara's breath caught. She stared at the name for a long moment, her mind racing. Carter. It sounded refined, familiar in a way that didn't belong to this quiet ranch life. She picked up one of the sketches. It was detailed, elegant, even. The lines were confident, practiced. This wasn't the work of someone who had spent their life in isolation. This was someone who had come from somewhere else. Somewhere different. Clara gently placed the sketch back, her hand suddenly careful, almost reverent. This wasn't just a hidden box. It was a piece of Elias he had chosen to leave behind. She closed the lid quickly, her heart beating faster than she expected. I shouldn't have looked, she whispered, and she meant it. Not because she was afraid of what she had found, but because it felt personal. Private in a way that made her feel like she had stepped into something uninvited. Clara stood, brushing the dust from her hands as if it might somehow erase the moment. But the truth lingered. Elias Boone wasn't his real name, and whatever life he had before, he had walked away from it completely. That evening, when Elias returned, Clara felt different. Not distant, not cold. Just aware. She watched him more closely as he set down his things, as he moved through the familiar rhythm of the house. Nothing about him had changed, and yet everything had. You've been busy, he said. Elias gave a small approving nod. It suits you. She hesitated. The word sat at the edge of her mind. Elias Carter. She could say it. She could ask. But instead, she took a breath and chose something else. Do you ever miss it? She asked softly. Elias paused, his brow faintly tightening. Miss what? Clara met his gaze, careful with her tone. Whatever you had before this. Silence filled the space between them. For a moment, she thought he might not answer. Then, quietly, he said, sometimes. It wasn't defensive. It wasn't closed off. Was honest. Clara felt something shift in her chest. Not fear, not suspicion. Sadness. Because she could hear it, the weight behind that single word. He hadn't left his past because it was easy. He had left it because he had needed to. Later that night, Clara sat by the window, watching the stars stretch across the vast sky. She thought about the name again. Elias Carter, a man with a past he wouldn't speak of, a life he had chosen to walk away from, and yet here he was, quiet, steady, kind in ways that didn't ask for recognition. Clara wrapped her arms lightly around herself. Exhaling slowly, she had expected secrets to feel dangerous, but this one didn't. It felt human. And for the first time, her curiosity softened into something else entirely. Understanding. When Elias passed by the doorway, he paused, glancing at her. The truth, Clara realized, didn't arrive all at once. It unfolded quietly like morning, light slipping through the edges of a closed curtain, soft, gradual, impossible to ignore once it was there. After the day she found the box in the barn, something between her and Elias had shifted, not broken, not strained, just different. Clara moved through the house as she always had, tending to small tasks, keeping things in order, but her thoughts lingered elsewhere. On the name she had seen, on the life Elias had left behind, on the quiet sadness she had heard in his voice when he admitted he sometimes missed it. She hadn't told him what she found, but the silence between them no longer felt like an agreement. It felt like something waiting. That evening, The air carried a gentle coolness as the sun dipped below the horizon. Clara set 2 cups of tea on the table, her hand steady despite the weight in her chest. Elias entered a moment later, removing his hat and placing it by the door. His gaze flickered briefly toward her, as if sensing something unspoken. "You've been quiet today," he said. Clara offered a small smile. "So have you." A faint hint of amusement crossed his face, gone almost as quickly as it appeared. They sat across from each other, the soft glow of lamplight filling the space between them. Clara wrapped her hands around her cup, gathering her courage. "I'd like to ask you something," she said gently. Elias didn't respond immediately, but he didn't look away either. After a moment, he nodded. "All right." Her heart beat faster. She could still step back. Change the subject. Keep the balance they had carefully built. But instead, she said, "Is Elias Boone your real name?" The question settled into the room, quiet but undeniable. For a long moment, Elias didn't move. Clara watched him carefully, not searching for guilt or fear, but for truth. But it changed. Everything. Clara felt a strange sense of relief. Not because she had uncovered something, but because he hadn't denied it. "You don't have to explain," she added quickly. "I just wanted to be honest with you." Elias studied her, his expression more open than she had ever seen it. "You found something," he said. It wasn't a question. Clara nodded. "In the barn, a box." Silence followed, but this time it wasn't guarded. It was thoughtful. Elias leaned back slightly, his gaze lowering for a moment as if he were deciding something important. Then, quietly, he said, "My name was Elias Carter." Clara's breath caught, but she remained still, letting him continue. "I didn't come from here," he said. "I came from a life that looked good from the outside." His voice remained steady, but there was something deeper beneath it now. Something real. There were expectations, responsibilities, a path that was already decided for me before I had a chance to choose it myself. Clara listened without interrupting. "I had everything I was supposed to want," he continued, "but none of it felt like it belonged to me." He paused, his eyes meeting hers again. "So I left." There was no drama in his words, no attempt to make it sound larger than it was, just truth. "I changed my name. Came here. Built something simple." Clara felt that quiet sadness again, but now it made sense. "You weren't." "No. I was trying to find something real." The words lingered between them. And somehow, Clara understood. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Elias's expression shifted slightly, something more uncertain taking its place. "What about you?" he asked. Clara blinked. "Me? You said you came here for your family," he said. "But that's not the whole story, is it?" Her heart tightened. He was right, and now it was her turn. Clara looked down at her hands, her voice quieter when she spoke again. "My family's land is failing," she admitted. "The debts kept growing, and I didn't know how to help." She swallowed. This was the only option I had left. Elias didn't interrupt. "I didn't come here expecting anything more than survival," she continued. "This arrangement, it was supposed to be temporary. Just a way to earn enough and leave." She hesitated, then added softly, "I didn't expect to feel at peace here." The last words barely rose above a whisper. Something changed in his expression, then not guarded, not distant, open. "For what it's worth," he said quietly, "I didn't expect this either." Clara looked up at him. "This wasn't supposed to matter," he added. Her lips curved into a small, almost uncertain smile. "And now?" Elias held her gaze for a long moment. "Now," he said, "it does." The room felt different. After that, not heavier, not tense, just honest. For the first time since Clara had arrived, there were no unspoken barriers between them. No assumptions, no careful distance. Just two people who had chosen, in their own way, to start over. And somehow, they had found each other in the process. Later that night, as Clara lay in bed, she stared up at the ceiling, her thoughts. Quieter than they had been in days, Elias Carter, a man who had walked away from everything expected of him. And her, a woman who had come here with nothing but desperation. It should have remained an arrangement, simple, practical, temporary. But it wasn't anymore, because somewhere between shared silence and quiet honesty, it had become something real. And that truth, Clara realized, was far more unexpected than any secret. After that evening, nothing between Clara and Elias returned to the way it had been before, but it didn't become complicated either. It became clear. The silence that once felt like distance now felt like understanding. The careful politeness that had defined their early days softened into something more natural, something that no longer needed to be measured or held back. The change revealed itself in small ways at first. One morning, Clara woke to the familiar quiet of the ranch, but this time she wasn't alone when she stepped outside, the early sunlight catching in his hair. "You're up early again," she said, stepping closer. Elias glanced at her, a faint smile touching his expression. "I could say the same." Clara hesitated for a moment before reaching out. "Let me help." He studied her briefly, then handed her the tool without question. They worked side by side, the task simple but shared. Their movements gradually fell into rhythm, no instructions needed, no awkward pauses, just quiet cooperation. At one point, their hands brushed. Clara stilled slightly, her breath catching, but Elias didn't pull away abruptly. Instead, he simply looked at her, calm and steady. There was no pressure in his gaze. No expectation, just presence. And somehow, that made the moment feel even more meaningful. Days passed, and the ranch began to feel less like a place they lived, and more like something they were building together. Clara introduced small changes: curtains by the windows, fresh herbs near the kitchen, a sense of warmth that hadn't been there before. Elias noticed everything. "You've made this place feel alive," he said one evening, leaning against the doorway as Clara arranged flowers. She smiled lightly. "It already was. I just helped it show." He considered that, then nodded. "That sounds like something you do." There was something different in his tone now, something softer, almost admiring. Clara felt it, and for once, she didn't look away from it. Their conversations grew longer, not forced, not heavy. But gradually, those conversations deepened. Clara told him about her childhood, the way her mother used to hum while working, the small joys that had once felt so certain. Elias listened carefully, never interrupting, never dismissing a single detail. And then, slowly, he began to share too. Not everything, but enough. He spoke of long roads traveled alone, of choices made without regret, but not without consequence. He spoke of what it felt like to leave behind a name that no longer fit. "I thought starting over would feel like freedom," he admitted one evening. Clara looked at him. "And does it?" Elias's gaze softened. "It does now." She didn't ask what had changed. She already knew. There were moments when the truth of their situation still lingered. This had not started as love. It had started as need. But somewhere along the way, that need had faded and something else had taken its place. Choice. Clara realized it one afternoon while standing in the doorway, watching Elias return from town. There was nothing remarkable about the moment. No grand gesture, no dramatic shift, just the sight of him riding toward the house and the quiet warmth that spread through her chest. When she saw him, she wasn't waiting for money anymore. She was waiting for him. That realization stayed with her. And it changed everything. That evening, as they sat together under the fading light of the sky, Clara spoke before she could second-guess herself. "This wasn't supposed to matter," she said softly. Elias glanced at her. "I remember." She looked out at the horizon. "But it does." There was no hesitation in her voice this time. No. Uncertainty. Just truth. Elias didn't respond immediately, but she felt his gaze on her. "And if it does?" he asked quietly. Clara turned to him, her expression steady. "Then we decide what to do with it." The words hung between them, simple but significant, because for the first time, they weren't talking about an arrangement. They were talking about a future. Elias exhaled slowly, as if something inside him had finally settled. "I spent a long time avoiding things that felt real," he admitted, "because I thought they'd come with expectations." Clara's voice softened. "And now?" By the time the letter arrived, Clara had almost forgotten what it felt like to live with uncertainty. Life on the ranch had settled into something steady, something real. The days no longer felt like steps toward an ending, but pieces of something. Ongoing. Something she hadn't expected to keep. That was why the letter changed everything. It came in the late afternoon, tucked among the usual small bundle Elias carried back from town. At first, nothing about it seemed unusual, just another envelope, neatly sealed, its paper slightly finer than the rest. But Clara noticed the shift in him immediately. He held it, longer than necessary. "You're quiet," Clara said gently, watching him from across the room. Elias didn't answer right away. His gaze remained fixed on the envelope as though he already knew what it contained. "It's from back east," he said. Clara's chest tightened slightly. Clara didn't interrupt, but she couldn't ignore the way his expression shifted, subtle, controlled, but undeniably different. When he finished, he folded the letter carefully, placing it on the table between them. "What is it?" she asked softly. Elias met her gaze. "They want me to come back." The words landed quietly, but their weight filled the entire room. Clara didn't speak at first. She didn't need to ask what that meant. She already understood. His old life, his real name. Everything he had left behind. Waiting for him again. "They're offering me a position," Elias continued. "A chance to reclaim everything I walked away from." His voice was calm, but there was something beneath it. Not excitement, not hesitation. Something deeper. Clara nodded slowly. "And do you want to go?" Elias didn't answer immediately. Instead, he looked around the room, the simple table, the soft light through the window, the quiet life they had built piece by piece. Then his gaze returned to her. "I don't know," he admitted. And for the first time since she had met him, he sounded uncertain. That night, Clara lay awake, staring at the ceiling as thoughts moved restlessly through her mind. She had always known this wasn't permanent. That was part of the agreement. She came for money. He needed help. But now, nothing about it felt temporary anymore. And that was what made this moment so difficult, because if Elias left, and she didn't know if she was ready for that. The next morning brought another change. A letter for Clara. She hadn't expected one, but the familiar handwriting on the envelope made her breath catch. Her mother. With careful hands. She opened it. The words inside were different from the ones she had grown used to, lighter, hopeful. The debts had eased. Help had come from an unexpected place. The land, though still fragile, was no longer at risk of being lost. For the first time in months, her family was going to be all right. Clara lowered the letter slowly, her heart full but conflicted. This was what she had come for. This was the reason she had agreed to everything. And now she was free to leave. She found Elias outside near the fence, his posture thoughtful as he looked out across the land. "I got a letter too," she said, stepping closer. He turned slightly. "Good news?" Clara nodded. "My family. They're going to be all right." Something softened in his expression. "That's good." It means I don't have to stay, she added quietly. The words hung between them, not as a statement, but as a truth. Elias absorbed that without reacting immediately. After a moment, before, the answer would have been easy, yes. But now, I don't know, she admitted. They stood there together, the open land stretching endlessly before them. Two people who had started this journey with clear intentions, and now found themselves standing at a crossroads neither of them had planned for. Elias spoke first. If I go back, he said slowly, everything will be certain again, structured, expected. Clara listened. And if I stay? He continued, it's this. He gestured lightly toward the ranch. Toward her. Clara's voice was soft. And which feels more like you? The honesty in his answer made her chest tighten, because she felt it too. This was never supposed to be a choice, Clara said quietly. Elias nodded. I know, but it is now. Neither of them moved. Neither of them rushed to fill the silence, because this moment didn't need urgency. It needed truth. Clara took a slow breath. I came here because I needed something, she said. And now I don't. Elias's gaze didn't waver. But I'm still here, she added. The meaning behind those words was clear. She wasn't staying out of obligation anymore. She was choosing to stay. Elias looked down briefly, then back at her. I left my old life because it didn't feel real, he said, and now it's asking me to return. Clara's voice was steady. And this? Elias didn't hesitate this time. This is real. The wind moved softly through the open land, carrying with it a quiet sense of change. Nothing had been decided yet. No final choices made. But something had shifted. And sometimes, that was the hardest choice of all. The morning felt different, not because anything had changed yet, but because everything was about to. Clara stood by the window, watching the first light stretch across the land. The ranch was quiet, as it always was at this hour, but today the silence carried something deeper. A decision was waiting, not just Elias's, hers too. Elias hadn't spoken much since the day the letter arrived. Not out of distance, but out of thought. Careful, deliberate thought. Clara understood that. This wasn't a small choice. It was the kind that shaped everything that came after. She heard the door open behind her and turned. Elias stepped inside, his expression calm but certain, in a way she hadn't seen before, and somehow she already knew. You've decided, she said softly. Elias nodded. I have. He stepped closer, stopping just a few feet away from her. For a moment, neither of them spoke, because this wasn't just about where he would go. It was about what they had become. I'm not going back. Elias said. The words were simple, but they carried the weight of everything he had left behind and everything he was choosing now. Clara felt her breath catch slightly, not out of surprise, but because hearing it made it real. Are you sure? She asked gently. Elias met her gaze without hesitation. I spent years living a life that looked right to everyone else, he said, but it never felt like mine. He paused, his voice steady but filled with quiet conviction. This does. Clara felt something warm and steady settle in her chest. Not excitement, not relief, something deeper, certainty. Elias glanced briefly toward the table, where the letter still rested. I thought I'd feel something when it came, he admitted. A pull, a reason to return. Clara didn't interrupt. But I didn't, he continued, because everything I was looking for, I already found here. His eyes returned to hers. Clara didn't look away. Not just the land, he added. Quietly, she understood what he meant. And for the first time, she didn't feel the need to hide what she felt in return. I should tell you something too, Clara said. Elias's expression softened slightly. You don't have to. I want to, she said gently. He nodded. Clara took a small breath. When I came here, I told myself this was temporary, she said. That I would stay just long enough to fix what was broken and then leave. Elias listened without speaking. But now nothing feels broken anymore, she continued. My family is safe. I could go back. She paused. And then more quietly, but I don't want to. The words settled between them, steady and clear, not spoken out of fear, not out of need, but out of choice. Elias stepped closer, not rushed. Not uncertain. Just present. You don't have to stay for me, he said. Clara smiled softly. I know, she replied, and that was what made it real. For a moment, the world seemed to narrow to just the two of them, the quiet room, the soft morning light, the unspoken understanding that had grown between them piece by piece. This wasn't supposed to happen, Elias said. Clara let out a small, warm breath of laughter. No, it wasn't. But I'm glad it did, he added. She looked at him then, her eyes steady. So am I? There were no grand declarations, no dramatic promises, just truth. And sometimes that was stronger than anything else. Later that day, they walked out across the land together. The sky stretched wide above them, endless and open. The wind moved gently through the grass, carrying with it a quiet sense of beginning, not starting over, starting forward. Clara glanced at Elias as they walked beside each other. Do you ever think about the life you left? She asked. Elias considered the question. Sometimes, he admitted. She nodded. And does it still feel like yours? He shook his head. No, he said simply. It feels like something I needed to leave to find this. Clara smiled faintly. It wasn't just a place. It was a life, a choice, a connection that had never been planned, but had become undeniable. They stopped near the fence where so many of their quiet conversations had begun. But this moment felt different. Clearer. Complete in a way that didn't need to be spoken. Clara rested her hand lightly against the wood, looking out at the horizon. When I first came here, she said, I thought I was giving up something. Elias turned slightly toward her. And now? He asked. She met his gaze. Now I think I was finding it.